Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 7, The Last Echo of the Lord of Bells, Chapters 14 through 17. News from the Seekin Front, Preparing for Departure, No Turning Back, and Dream Dive. In these chapters, we finally make contact again with Candoron, and it turns out is gonna be a minute before she is ready to interact with anybody but Hugh in a dreamscape. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat. What's up? What's up? I'm very excited, you guys, because these chapters are so packed. So I'm going to try and move it along, because y'all know I have a tendency to linger and wax poetical about some shit that is, ultimately irrelevant. Well, I say that. That's kind of insulting. Maybe it's not irrelevant, but it is certainly of questionable relevance sometimes. So we start off back with Valia in chapter 14, and I have to admit that I have been surprised every single time we are in Valia's POV. And it's not, we've been in her point of view enough times now that I should be more used to it. But I keep thinking I'm just going to get a little bit of a taste of what's going on and, probably not return to her POV again, or really, really intermittently. But we have been pretty consistently in her head. And I think I was sort of viewing her points of view as more like Ilenia K and Das, where we've been in her head twice now. It's, more than once, I think, but it has been so intermittent that every time it happens, it's a surprise. So with Valia, when it happens, it's a surprise for a different reason, because I'm like, oh, we were kind of just here. I think I am expecting what he's doing here to be set up things narratively from where she's standing, and then we go outside of her to actually see how it unfolds. So it's been interesting to see how it unfolds from her perspective as well. So we find out some things here about the Seekins. This is truly, truly wild. Now, they're a foe that I don't think it's out of line to say the likes of which Anastas has never seen. I feel like that's pretty much true. There's so many aspects of this that I find really fascinating, but the main one is that they have perfected, I will say perfected, even though I recognize that that's not literally true, but in comparison to pretty much any other nation, for lack of a better word, they have perfected the concept and approach to developing artificial affinities, which results in this unbelievably unified fighting style. Because everybody is able to develop the same affinities, they can cooperate in this truly seamless way that is unheard of, essentially. Any other army is going to be, having to work with the strengths of the particular fighters that they have. They're going to have to adjust things depending on who's doing what, and really keep in mind a million different affinities that interact in a million different ways. And this nation has figured out how over the course of decades. So it is a really long process that can be extremely unsuccessful and dangerous, but they have been consistent and invested enough that it seems like they've kind of nailed it by this point. And their affinity that they, that they're really like known for is plant affinity. And this is so cool. So just going to read some of these examples. The plant and tree mages, I should say a little bit more specifically. Entire forests of bloodthirsty brambles grew amidst Havathi armies in minutes, while immense living bulwarks sheltered the Seekan troops. Roads and bridges wove themselves from trees and grasses to let the Seekan armies pass freely over rough terrain. And the Seekans hardly even needed supply lines thanks to how much food their plant mages could grow in their various forward bases. They could bring a crop to ripeness in a week or less. Of course, growing food that quickly wrecked the soil for decades, if not longer, without extensive interventions from soil or rot mages, but since it was Havathi territory, the Seekans didn't care. And I really find this so fascinating. This is the sort of thing I would love to spend more time in their nation, finding out about the many ways that they are putting this to use, especially the concept of grass mages. Like tree mages, it's a very obvious sort of benefit to attack if you're using like tree roots or branches, things that you already are very aware. We're dealing with huge organisms that are hard and heavy and at times very flexible. However, the grass mage concept reminds me a lot of paper mage, where it sounds at the top like, oh, that's sort of lame. And then if you give it any thought at all, that's actually going to be so useful. And really, potentially, if you build your plans correctly around it, you could do a lot with that. And I am just really fascinated by the idea of all of these mages having the exact same affinity and working together in an extremely unified way. That is so scary. I mean, And then it says, the plant mages were only the beginning. Most of the Seekan armies marched with huge numbers of poison gas mages, even more than siege or sharpshooter mages, covering Havathi positions with gases that ranged from painful and irritating to agonizing and lethal. The gas mages could be countered by wind mages, but doing so was an inordinate stretch on Havath's weather mage corps, who were already spread thin by the ongoing climactic assault by the Coven, and by the need to keep enough of them in Havath City to maintain the defensive windshield in an emergency. Most horrifying was their use of alchemical enhancements. They pumped mind-blind volunteers full of various alchemical compounds, making them terrifyingly strong, fast, aggressive, and hard to kill. It was more than enough to make them a threat to any normal battle mage. They would die in agony in a few months, but their families were offered payment, and there were more than enough desperate people willing to volunteer for their suicide troops. This is one of those things, guys, that, I feel like there would be so many people being like, what? It's voluntary. They choose this. But when you just stop and think about how desperate you have to be to volunteer for something like this, that is in itself, that's the horror. It's not what they're volunteering for that's so hideous. It's that they are so desperate in the first place. That's the part that's awful. And I really, there's a book series that I sort of stalled out, and I actually haven't checked to see if he has written an additional book, because I know it was supposed to be a multi-part series. But I was loaned the first book, The Lies of Loch Lamora, which was really excellent. And it is about this professional group of thieves and their extensive library of disguises and training to take on different mannerisms and accents. And eventually it becomes sort of a Robin Hood thing where they are attempting to help those less fortunate up against the fucking bastard wealthy nobles of the city. And in the third book, which is part of why I fell off, was that it was so disturbing. And the books tend to end on sort of a down note because it's meant to keep you wanting to see them victorious in the next book. There is a really horrible sort of amphitheater where you can be paid a lot of money to go in and essentially give up yourself to whomever is in there to have whatever done to you they want to do to you. And they bid on who gets to do, and they necessarily, the people who are bidding aren't necessarily the ones doing the thing. They are sitting up in the audience and they are giving instructions to the people on the ground who are performing whatever action. And sometimes it's just something really humiliating, like shaving somebody's head and stripping them naked. Sometimes it's really, really violent. And sometimes it's like actually winds up being fatal, even though they don't intend for you to die. It's sort of like you write a waiver that, well, shit may go too far. And there is an argument that this guy has with somebody because he's posing as a noble who is meant to be there and goes in not realizing quite what it is. And he's talking to somebody and is like, this is incredibly fucked. You get that, right? And the guy is like, they want to be here. They're choosing to be, they don't have to be here. And he's like, yeah, but they are like completely desperate and have nowhere else to go. So that's what makes it wrong. Do you not? And he's like, I don't see what your problem is. They walked through those doors perfectly willingly. They're not prisoners. We didn't drag them here. They're choosing all of this. So I don't know what you're fucking whining about. And that person is really like representative of a significant portion of the population today, where when people talk about personal responsibility, that factor in the conversation is left out so often. You can talk all you want about personal responsibility and how people make choices, and sometimes they make bad choices, but sometimes there isn't a good choice to make. There's always this sort of fantasy we build up that like, well, they could have just done XYZ instead, but they chose. That's not always true. Sometimes people are backed in a corner and it's either one of two bad things that they are getting screwed either way. And often that is completely out of their hands. It's just, we have this comforting delusion that we are always in control and that everything that happens to us ultimately came down to a series of choices that we made at one time. It's horseshit. We make choices where we can. And I'm going to go ahead and say at least 70% of what happens to us in our lives is not something we get to choose. Where we are born, who our parents are, where we wind up going to school initially, and that sets up so much for the rest of our lives. What kind of jobs are available to us and where we live, highly dependent on what kind of resources you have. So anyway, the idea here of these people who are like volunteering for a guaranteed suicide, they're not signing up to be soldiers and maybe they're going to get to go home. And if they die in battle, that's just what happens to soldiers. They are signing on the dotted line to be chemically altered and sent out as basically fodder. They will die. They are not coming back, and they know that. And I just cannot comprehend how anybody is okay with this is, the same thing with the American military. People will be like, well, if you can't afford to go to college, just sign up for the army. Just fucking volunteer to kill people or potentially be killed to get the right to go to school like a million other people get to do with no risk to their body or the bodies of others. And we think that's just fucking fair and reasonable. And it's insane. It's fucking bananas. And we really think that this is like not only valid, but what an opportunity, what an advantage we provide by giving you this option at all. It's sick. Dan says, just playing devil's advocate, but in a world full of magic where they can't use magic as mind blind, it's a way for them to make an impact they never could. I mean, based on the way this is discussed, it doesn't sound like they're excited about making an impact. That's not like, this just sounds, it says there were more than enough desperate people. And that's literally all that is said there about it. So again, if that's what we're talking about, that would be in the text. And it's not. So maybe we find out some more info later on that gives a different dimension to this. But from where I'm sitting right now, and also the fact that like the artificial affinity training came with so many casualties initially. Like, this is a really dangerous thing to try and do. And they perfected doing this for large groups over time. They are obviously somewhat ruthless and ready to sacrifice lives, whether they're mind blind or not, and just be like, well, them's the breaks, but it's all working towards a bigger, brighter future, a progress where we have everybody working together. And it's like, in the end, what it's for is power. That's what it's for. So yeah, this whole thing is just so sad, and it just bums me out. The whole concept of people being mind blind in this universe is one that I don't even like to think about, because of the incredible amount of disadvantage that I assume you suffer, and the ways that you could get taken advantage of. There are so many other ways beyond something like this that it is really upsetting. So anyway, I said I wasn't going to do this, and then I fucking did this. Let's go on to the actual meeting here, because things are in a bad way for the Havathi. The whole situation, the only thing that she's like, well, at least they can't blame me for this. That's the one upside. And it says the intertwined were notably silent, which made Valia suspicious. Not that the Liches were ever the most talkative members, but considering her recent meeting to them. So then she has this little, let's see, here it is. Archmage Thaston. The simple fact of the matter, Thaston said, is that we need more great powers, and we've exhausted all our more palatable options for acquiring them. And what we have in this meeting is essentially a come to Jesus moment for the Havathi, because a lot of them seem to not have really admitted to themselves the direness of the situation they are currently in. And they are really brought in on, no, guys, this is truly very serious now, by the level of what it is he is suggesting and putting on the table as a potential option. So, the first thing he says is to bring back Nyana Everflame. And she has this really interesting, rust affinity that is combined with air and water and iron. And it's awesome in terms of, battle, but also it fucks her up. And they have insisted that she retire because she was doing so much damage to herself. So essentially what they are saying is we should pull her back in, and, she'll know this is going to be the end for her, but probably she would want to go out this way, which does make some sense. And apparently she's kind of terrible. Like, she killed I think an entire city, if I'm not mistaken, like lost control here it is. Incinerated a provincial governor and a city of 10,000 souls out of impulsive anger. So I am just going to say, the fact that the Havathi have this chick just like living in the lap of luxury after doing things like this, and are keeping her and her family in style, is very gross. And it feels uniquely American, actually. Her family is like, their identity as members of her family are kept secret so that they can continue to just interact in society and not have that stigma attached that they're related to her. And that is how the Havathi are keeping her under control, by being like, we're looking out for your family and they're living great lives, but if you fuck this up, then that's it for them. And she has enough interest in her family that has been working. MX Shard says, minor correction, Nyana is the white phosphorus mage. The Rust Queen is a different person. Oh, I'm sorry. White phosphorus. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So it's the Rust Queen. That's the next one, because the Rust Queen is imprisoned. Nyana is in retirement. So she is a more respectable option out of the two. Right. Thank you for that correction, MX Shard. So let's see. But I'm trying to find the next spot here. Oh, right. So even using her against the Sika posed risks to Havath's armies, because using this rust affinity, apparently rust causes heat, even though it doesn't seem like that to you and I. The heat is so like drawn out because rusting happens slowly. If you have this affinity, it happens really quickly, which causes these insane explosions. And it will, if she uses it on like a weapon you're holding, you will just get fried. Like, it is instant death. It's not even just about, oh, I can disarm you. It's much, much worse than that, which is truly intimidating. And then there's a mention of something called Yellowstone, which instantly everybody is just like, no. And it turns out that this is the most poisonous substance. And what it reminds me of course, is something radioactive. Like, we're talking about a slow, hideous death that seeps through all kinds of solid objects. No matter what's done to contain it, this feels like something that's really, yeah, exactly. Dan is saying this was uranium, right? That's what I thought as well. And so even though he has proposed some like really sketch things, this is the one that everybody is like, we're never doing that. And I have to say that this being brought up makes me feel like maybe we are doing that. I mean, maybe the threat is going to happen. So only the case to use Yellowstone and hire Dorsasine was rejected. I forgot about the suggestion to hire Dorsasine. So this leads to Valia leaving the meeting and getting intercepted by one of the Intertwined. And they're talking to her, and she's sort of like, what is going on here? Because there are 3 avatars talking to her, and they all have this vibe that's like off. And I sort of wondered initially if this was some kind of illusion, but it turns out what she's sensing is that they're all in pain, and that it is a result of their overlapping lichdoms. And she says, you're supposed to be immune to that. And it says, we usually are, but not at the moment. The suspicion that had started growing in the back of Valia's mind started firming into a certainty. The mechanism that lets you all overlap is how the Duarks control you, isn't it? Ikola is punishing you right now for something. It is how they control us, but Ikola is not punishing us now. We have chosen to feel this pain. The overlap suppressor enchantments also make it easier for the Duarks mages to monitor our activity, at least outside the conclave. We are treated in public as peers, but we are little more than slaves. We were promised immortality and power, but once our domains were complete, the Duarks revealed our chains. And Valia wants to be like, they would never, and then it's sort of a step back and going, oh yeah, yeah they would. Which, this is so incredibly gross that it actually gets her one step closer to being like, maybe what Alustin is aiming for isn't so out of line. Which, you know, it really has to be hideous for her to start feeling like she's on his side. But it's like a combo of this and then finding out that he was correct about the like interworld collusion that really makes her be like, Jesus, I have had no idea what the fuck is going on. And they said your political backing will be more useful than you claim, but we also have a different purpose in mind. If our plans fail, we don't achieve our freedom, we want you to kill us. And at first she's like, I absolutely am not capable of doing that. I don't have that kind of power. And they're like, okay, enough. We don't have time for you to whine about how you can't do it. We know that you could do it. You have like echo enchantment power that is very good for something that's sort of overlapping like ours. And we could even tell you how. We're not going to defend ourselves or anything. And she's like, well, that sounds like a fucking horrible way to die. And they're like, yeah, it does, doesn't it? But we would still rather, which just goes to show how incredibly terrible this whole thing is for us. And she's like, all right, look, if I agree to do that for you, I want some answers from you. And she says, what do you know about Havath's multiversal backers? And they go, ooh, look at you with the info. That's a pretty serious question. But you are agreeing to do something pretty serious for us. So I guess that's fair. And as they begin to talk, she's just like, wow, I can't believe I have been involved in this, on this side of everything. And that's the end of the chapter. We don't get to hear who the backers are, what they're doing, or anything like that. And I am so curious. Like, Havath, the more you find out about them, the more ugliness you see revealed. It's really, really slow, the like burn of this. There's certain things right off the top that, yeah, they absolutely leveled Helicote. Like, that's valid. One would say that's plenty right there. I mean, would that be considered a genocide if they're not like all the same race of people? I don't know what counts, but as you continue on, it just begins to be more and more horrible, the variety of things they're up to. So let's see, chapter 15, preparing for departure. We have a scene here. We're back with Hugh and co. And Godric is finally going over to sit next to Tristan and talk to him about feeling, a little bit ashamed of the way that he handled everything between the two of them. And Tristan isn't upset at all. In fact, like, Godric is like, I should have talked to you about what it was that I was leaving to do. And Tristan's like, what? No, you shouldn't. That would have been super dangerous. And like, you shouldn't give away that kind of information. And you could see Godric just being like, oh my God, you're so practical. And he says clan Castus like a swear. But in the end, he's like, look, I'm just not ready to date. And Tristan says, I kind of figured. It sucks, but it's understandable. If we could just be friends, though, that'd be cool. And when he tells Sabe that they talked, Sabe is blown away by the fact that they just had a discussion like grown-ups. And I really, really want to emphasize something here, because I believe in this kind of direct, honest communication. And I think this is like the key to being a decent person and having good relationships. That said, it can be really easy to read these sorts of exchanges and forget that most people are not this kind of self-aware or practical. Like, he gets best case scenario when he talks to Tristan. Tristan, I'm not holding any grudges. I get that you're grieving. I get that you were doing something highly dangerous and specific. But there is a reason why people are afraid to just have these kinds of conversations, because most people aren't like Tristan, you know? So the key is to trying to figure out how, like, whether a person is that way, and only getting involved with people like that so that you will be able to have these kinds of rational adult conversations. But it's simply not as frequent an occurrence as I personally wish it were. It's so best case scenario. So yeah, but Sabe just being like, I can't believe that you just went and talked to him. It comes down to Godric being like, so you're going to go and talk to Venta, right? And she tries to be like, well, we haven't even dated that long. Like, it's not even. And he just looks at her like, bitch, are you really just going to like try and sidestep this? And it's very clear she knows better. And she walks away with this sort of vibe, like she is going to do it, but it's probably going to take her a little while to work her way up to it. So let's see. Oh yeah, this is when they start talking, because the others of Clan Castus come along after this conversation, and they are talking about the armor elemental. And Rana is also here, and she's like, you guys, I have to talk to him about his scent training. And they keep going back and forth. There's like a lot of fun dialogue in here that I desperately wish the narrator for the audiobook did a better job with. It's so weird how good he is at voices, and yet how bad he is at bringing a scene to life. It's just like, some people are excellent at this sort of thing, and I want him to be able to take some of the talent he clearly has for voice work and bring it more into the narrative role, and he's just not quite hitting it. So this is the sort of thing that I reread in text, because I sort of wanted to see how it would go in my mind versus the way he had read it, and it was a lot more fun. So anyway, this is when they're trying to decide what they're going to call the elemental. Everybody is arguing about it, and Rana eventually uses like some kind of, smell assault on everybody and gets them to calm the hell down on it. So yeah, the next chapter 16 is called No Turning Back. And Hugh is very relieved that they are getting on the road without ceremony. They're on what he's calling flying ships, but Godric corrects as like, no, they're just regular ships that are being flown by external forces from wind mages, which is not the same thing. And while I appreciate being told as a reader exactly how this is actually working, I just want to be like, Godric, you are way too pedantic. It's just flying ships. Just let it be. It's fine. And here we have an interesting interaction between Hugh and Mackerel, where Mackerel is actually expressing that he is nervous about going up against Alustin. And Hugh admits, like, I am really uncomfortable in a lot of ways, because he was a mentor who saw something in me when nobody else did, and I can't help but feel indebted to him for that. And I know what he's doing is hideous, but it's like, I just don't know how to reconcile the fact that I care about him, and yet he was willing to do to me what he did and to take out Candoron. It's all mixed up. And I can't imagine this. Like, I feel very lucky in a lot of ways that I have never had to go through any kind of like really profound betrayal of this type. And, probably a lot of us haven't of this type, but I think that there are a lot of people out there who have found out that their parents were hiding something huge or lying about something, or they had a partner they were serious with they found out was cheating or hiding things. This is not an unheard of experience. I just personally haven't really been on the receiving end of this kind of thing. And I can only imagine what it's like to feel like simultaneous with the extreme love and, you know, this investment you feel in a person, to also be right up against almost hatred because of other things they did that feel so cold-blooded and horrible. So I appreciated this chat that they have, and I just like that he can confide in Mackerel, who understands what he's saying. They can't really have like a full conversation exactly, but he is able to have enough of a conversation that he can interpret how Mackerel is feeling and express himself in kind, which I think is like, this is the sort of thing that I sort of wish I could do with Pippin, for example. Pippin's great company, and I will talk to him as if he's a person, but I'm not getting anything back from him really, except for a sense of approval or disinterest. Those two are pretty much it. And I just like when he has these sort of conversations with Mackerel. So he goes to sleep, and I forgot about like him and Rhodes trying to make conversation, which is extremely awkward until they finally start talking about magic specifically, which sort of gets them out of their heads and into thinking about the things that they are respectively really good at and how they overlap. Because, you know, Hugh has the crystal magic, which ice, the concept of the structure there is really similar. And so there's a lot of things that they have in common in terms of the way they approach their affinities. But, you know, I sort of like the fact that there isn't any real resolution with Rhodes. There's no sense of closure because he doesn't care enough to create closure. Like, it's, you know, the thing with Rhodes that I find really interesting is how he clearly does, like, have some regrets looking back, but not enough to muster up the courage to have an uncomfortable conversation. It's still too much for him. And like, you know, not that long ago, there wasn't even real regret at all. I think the regret is fairly recent. Up until the last conversation they had, he was just being like, well, it was fun to torment you. And there is something about this that feels extremely real to me. This is just, unfortunately, how a lot of conflicts go. They peter out into this weird sort of, I guess we're fine, but you never really have a satisfying conversation in which the person apologizes in the way you want. Anyway, so he goes to sleep and winds up in this bizarre dream, which eventually Talia pops up and is like, aha, I knew it. And he like whirls around going, what? What did you know? And she's like, you had been having trouble sleeping and having weird dreams, and I had my suspicions that you weren't having your own dreams. And he's like, what do you mean? Of course this is a dream. And I'm like, Hugh, you have got to listen better. She did not say this wasn't a dream. She said this wasn't your dream. And sure enough, what she is saying is that he is in Canderon's dream, which makes sense because Hugh had been saying how he could sense that she was dreaming. So him being sort of pulled into this when they still have this bond, enough of a bond that he can sense the dreaming is happening. It makes a lot of sense to me that he can get pulled in like this. It's made clear this isn't the usual way that the warlock bond actually works. You can't just like jump, like there is a naturally occurring sort of protected barrier between minds and consciousness and subconscious and that sort of thing. So it's not like it just because he can feel that she's dreaming, he can go into her dreams. That's not really a given in the way I am saying, you know, but it made plenty of sense to me that this was where he had wound up, even though he himself seemed pretty surprised. Like it seemed like he wasn't considering that this was even an option. And I really liked because what happens here, I was sort of surprised, you guys. And like, I'm interested to hear how you all responded to this. As soon as she says you're in Kandaron's dream, I'm going, oh my God, maybe you could fucking talk to her. But she has to suggest it to him. She has to say, I think it's possible that you could communicate. And it really takes him off guard in a way that surprised me. Because that was just immediately where my mind went. I was like, oh my God, what if this means that you can chat? And she is very clear that, like, I don't know how it's going to work. Like, it may not actually work the way I'm imagining. I don't want to get your hopes up too much. But it's definitely possible. And at the very least, trying isn't going to hurt her. And she gives him a spell that he can use with his dream affinity. She can't because of her tattoos. And this will create a kind of connection. And what's going on is the Kandaron's mind has, like I said, these natural protections in place that are, they could possibly like snap back at Hugh in a way that is dangerous for him. And he has to hope that he is able to like identify himself and make it clear he isn't here to harm her. And this will like allow him through, which is indeed what ends up happening here. It's a really like, the way that this is described, I thought was really neat. So I'm trying to jump to the spot here where he does this. Let's see. I'm trying to find the spot. Here it is. Oh yeah. I love Talia kisses him, and in the dream, the whole sensory experience of it like is jumbled and doesn't really make sense, but it's still like, you know, a very sensory experience. So there is something to that that's familiar in that way. And I liked the descriptions that he uses here of, let's see, colorful sounds, floral scented lights, rasping tastes, which I'm always a fan of using descriptive, like using adjectives that don't correspond with the noun, you know? I really think that's a fun little trick that a lot of writers use. It's not, you know, like unusual, but it always is very satisfying to read because you still kind of get it, even if it's not actually rational. So yeah, the first place he winds up is this tunnel that he is being pulled through. And all of these sort of sensory organs are stretching out and like getting a vibe on him and whether or not they should attack or not. And he eventually leaves this tunnel and is in Skyhold's grand library. He found the books were minuscule in size, and it was a struggle to pick them up between his fingertips. This was obviously Kandaron's perception of the library, and Hugh found himself much more impressed with Kandaron's ability to read books that were so small compared to her. And I'm extremely curious about how this works. Like, you know, does she make herself able to see things that are very small more easily, or does she make things that are small look big to herself? Just like, how does she do this? You know what I'm saying? And he tries to open them and read them, but the words are not making sense. And let's see, there's a floating platform waiting for him where one hadn't been before, and he stepped onto it confidently. And he is hovering above the index, and I love this. He could feel it notice him, and then a wave of gratitude and happiness rolled over him. Hugh couldn't help but sag in relief a bit, as the guilt he'd felt over being unable to help the index while he was still at Skyhold evaporated. It had been in immense pain trying to operate without its link, but it seemed Hugh's effort to repair his pact had helped the magical construct as well, and I do find that very comforting, you know? The index didn't keep him. A hole opened up in the cloud and his platform descended once more. And when he sees Candaron, she has her original wings in this scenario. The only way to describe them was glorious. They were such a rich golden color that Hugh almost expected them to glimmer like metal, save for along the edges of her wings, which faded from gold to pure white, almost like the wings were outlined. Hugh almost didn't notice when his descending platform came to a halt atop Candaron's dais. He was staring so intently at her wings. And she has a moment of sort of staring, trying to assess him. Then she comes up and hugs him. But clearly she is thinking this is a dream, that she is dreaming about Hugh. So she's enjoying the moment to hug him, but it isn't something that she's taking particularly seriously. And then she steps back after the hug and is like, hold up, you're really here. And he's like, yes, I am. And she's like, what did you do? How? And he explains about the bond with his friends and starts to really explain. And she's like, okay, look, I am so glad you're here. And I am so curious about how this all went. But you being here is really fucking dangerous. There's some things that could go wrong because I'm building my demean, and you being in and amongst all of these workings, this could kill you. So I love you so much, but you have got to go. And he's like, but I just got here. And she's like, I don't want you to, but you are unsafe. And he really quickly says, okay, the only thing I want to know is how long you're going to be trapped here, because we have less than a week before a Lustan strike. And she says another year at least. And, he takes this another year at least very, very seriously. But I am unsure as to whether or not it is literally a year. In as much as he understands time. Do you get what I'm saying? Because she is inside this demean that is being created, that she is creating. I'm saying that in such a passive way. This bitch is responsible for all of this. But she is doing this in what feels almost like a different dimension. And I don't know whether or not this is actually the way time passes for him as well. I'm going to assume that she would be aware of how time passes externally because she has done so much studying of demeans and how they work and all that. So I'm sort of going with, yeah, she knows enough to be able to say confidently a year. But it did occur to me that perhaps it's not as simple as the way she said it. And I may be completely off base there. I would like to state for the record, if it turns out it's an actual year, I will not be mad about it. Personally, I'm kind of into the idea of him being alone for such a long time without his mentor to have, like, to clean up, because I want to see what our friends do to take care of the situation when they don't have this great power behind them. I'm really, really interested to know. It's all well and good to want Candoron back in just the sense that you want your friend back. But I am really wanting to see them attempt to handle this themselves and just not rely on a power that is like, it's not even just that she's a badass. She is so high powered that it feels like, you know, I know it's unfair to be like, oh, they wouldn't have to lift a finger. We have seen that's not true. We have seen them fighting in the same battle while she is taking care of shit, and they are very much on their own. So I'm not trying to suggest that it would be a cakewalk, but knowing that she's there in the background, potentially as like a kind of fallback or just a backup plan at all, is a comfort. And I want to see them do this without that comfort and how they handle it all. So, yeah, this is the whole moment here. I have a lot of questions about it. She says, "Stop Alustin, hide away the tongue eater until I awaken. The continent cannot afford the tongue eater's use, nor likely survive it." Hugh felt Candoron pushing him away and fought her. He wouldn't leave her again. And then he sees this shockwave that comes at him in such a manner that he's like, oh shit, I better get the fuck out of here. Like, as soon as he sees it, he's thinking, if I stay, I am not coming out of this dream wholly intact, which is so intimidating. Like, genuinely, you guys, there was something about that I found really chilling. I would love to know what that really looked like. Does this mean that he would lose his mind? Or, like, lots of questions here. I don't mean to be morbidly curious, but I guess I kind of am. And I don't, of course, want this to happen to Hugh. But there are times where I sort of appreciate getting to see a little bit of what a worst case scenario could look like. And just a glimpse of it. It's part of why I liked getting to see the cold mines like almost succeed. Just, you know, having something that's sort of like being threatened and then absolutely nothing happens with it can be a little unsatisfying. You want a little something. But there's no way for me to get any satisfying conclusion to this specifically without there being really, you know, potentially really dire consequences. Oh God, Dan is in the chat saying, and this is how you become a mad scientist. Guilty. That is a fair, like, it's the sort of thing that I would want to know just out of the curiosity of it. But also I have such a, and I'm sure there a lot of people listening understand what I'm talking about. I have such an aversion to hurting people that even when I'm playing like a video game where it's fully not real, and I can undo the thing instantly, just like, you know, like get out of there and go back to my save. Even then, I don't like to do the mean, cruel thing. I don't even like giving like kind of salty answers to people. And so the curiosity is really, really hypothetical, because even if I was able to like put him through this and take it all back, I still couldn't quite do it. I need the writer to do it. I need it to be taken out of my hands and not be like up to me. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, all that said, I really like felt for him that he finally gets this contact, and it's like fully, you know, she's not really there, but she is enough there that they can embrace each other. They can have a really sweet moment together that this is the sort, I'm going to get so emotional, you guys. I'm going to try really hard to hold it together. But if you have lost somebody close to you, chances are you have had a dream that they are still here. And it can feel so real. And the feeling of them being back, and then you wake up and you have to readjust and realize that was a dream and they aren't here. This happens with me with my dad a lot. I will have dreams and wake up, and my first thought will be, oh, I had a dream about Dad. I really should call him. I haven't talked to him in such a long time. And then all of a sudden it clicks and I'm like, of course I haven't. And it's awful. It's awful. Every time that happens, it's like a punch to the gut. So I really envy Hugh here. You know? It's a year, but he knows he's going to see her again. Ugh, you guys. I hate crying. It's so tiresome. I'm sorry. I'm just extra emotional today because an aunt that I'm really, really close with, that I was close with, is probably going to pass either tonight or tomorrow morning. And she's had Alzheimer's for a couple of years now. And I haven't spoken to her in a while because the last time I did, she didn't recognize my voice. And it just got worse and worse, so until she just didn't recognize anybody's voices. And so it's, the concept of loss is really on my mind. Anyway, sorry everybody. Every time I tell myself, just get through it, don't cry, it's like, why did I bother even trying to pretend? I can't help it anymore. I used to have such a hard time crying, and then when my dad died, it was like a dam broke and I cry over everything all the time now. It just really, it slows me down. And it's likely for the best, but you know. So that's how the chapter ends, is Hugh waking up and he's got tears on his cheeks. And I really do feel for him in having to leave her after, you know, just finding her again. But also knowing that she's ultimately going to be okay and he will see her eventually is more than a lot of us get after something like this. And I'm sure, you know, that like Godric would be elated. And hang in there, Hugh. You'll be all right. Anyway, so MX Shard says, oh, mood. I feel so guilty in reverse course every time I try an evil playthrough of something. Truly, cannot do it. Cannot do it. I have tried a couple of times. Like, even playing Skyrim, there's a faction that you can join that is like the Thieves Guild or something. And what you are meant to do is like steal a gem from somebody's stall and plant it in another person's pocket and basically frame them for stealing and get them arrested, maybe killed. And I had to do a lot of research to find out just how much of a benefit I could get by doing this, because I wasn't willing to do it at first. I was just like, I'm going to frame somebody? I hate this. What? He didn't do anything. And I find out later, like, the guy I'm framing is kind of a piece of shit. So that made me feel a little bit better about it. And I went ahead and did it. But yeah, just like shit like this that I was like, oh, come on. That's just mean. Anyway. All right. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Thank you, Dan, for commissioning this. Really interested to see where we're going still. And until Thursday. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.